The air over San Diego hummed with the perpetual drone of training engines, a sound that had become the city's wartime heartbeat. But inside the cavernous, poorly lit hangar of Naval Air Station North Island, the silence felt heavy, oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic clink of tools on metal. Petty Officer Second Class Thomas "Tom" Sterling, 22, a man built more for books than ballistics, wiped a streak of grease from his brow with the back of a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. He was the most unlikely ordnance specialist on the base. His real passion was engineering, a dream deferred by the draft, now channeled into the tedious, critical task of maintaining the base's vast, life-saving arsenal. Tonight he was alone, tasked with inventorying a newly arrived shipment of M2 Browning. 50 caliber machine guns, a batch rumored to be temperamental, even cursed, by the hangar crew. A thick, damp chill clung to the concrete floor despite the California heat, and the shadows thrown by the single overhead utility lamp seemed to stretch and shift, making the stacks of crates loom like silent, watchful sentinels. The wind outside picked up, rattling a loose pane in a high window with a sound like a whisper turning into a shout. Tom shivered, pulling his denim jacket tighter. He worked on the 8th. 50 cal in the row, a beast of a weapon, its cold steel radiating an unsettling permanence. Tom was meticulous, a trait that had earned him the base's trust, but was now feeding his growing unease. The manifest indicated 20 machine guns. He had counted 20. Yet the accompanying logistical report, a faded, official-looking document he had unearthed beneath a pile of routine paperwork, listed 21, a single, missing machine gun. A clerical error? Highly probable. But the logistical report was stamped with a barely legible seal from the Office of Naval Intelligence, and that detail, however faint, was screaming in his mind. He checked the crate. Empty. He checked the number. It corresponded to the 21st weapon on the list. His breath hitched. This was more than a paperwork snafu. Ordnance was strictly accounted for. Missing a rifle was bad. Missing a 50 cal was a federal crisis, especially with the heightened fear of sabotage permeating the West Coast. Suddenly, a loud metallic scrape echoed from the back of the hangar near the bay doors. Tom froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, heavy. He quickly extinguished the utility lamp, plunging the aisle into near-total darkness, illuminated only by a sliver of weak moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. Tom grabbed a heavy wrench, his only weapon, and pressed himself against the cold metal of an aircraft fuselage. His mind raced, cataloging the stories he dismissed as barracks gossip. The unusual movements of a German U-boat off the coast months ago, the tightening security around new experimental aircraft designs, the recent unsolved accidents that had plagued the base. He heard footsteps now, slow, uneven, coming closer. They were too quiet for a regular patrol, too precise for a stray dog. A thin beam of light, a blacked-out military flashlight, cut through the darkness, sweeping across the rows of crates. It stopped, briefly, right where the empty 50 cal crate sat. Tom's eyes, adjusting to the dark, caught a figure, tall, bulky, but moving with a strange, almost unnatural stealth. The person wore an unfamiliar, dark hooded coat, not the standard-issue Navy peacoat. This was no American sailor. As the figure moved past the row, something glinted in the fleeting moonlight. It wasn't the reflection of a weapon, but a flash of brass and leather strapped around the person's waist. It looked like an improvised ammunition belt, far larger than any standard-issue carrier, capable of holding hundreds of rounds. An illegal, homemade modification, exactly the kind of thing the missing 50 cal, supposedly cursed, would require to fire for a sustained period. The very image that gave the legendary title to the story. The figure reached a maintenance bench in the far corner, a place Tom had meticulously cleaned just hours earlier. They paused, then began to methodically rifle through a toolbox. The faint, almost inaudible click of metal on metal confirmed the theft. Not ammunition, not a weapon, but something small, precise, and vital. The mystery was thickening faster than a coastal fog. Why steal a non-essential tool? Why the cloak? And where was the 21st machine gun? Before Tom could formulate a plan, the figure straightened up, clearly having found what they were looking for. The beam of the flashlight flicked toward the aisle, momentarily blinding Tom despite its weakness. He ducked back, scraping his elbow on the rough aluminum, biting back a cry. "Who's there?" A guttural, heavily accented voice sliced through the silence. It wasn't German, but a sharp, hard language Tom couldn't place. Eastern European, perhaps? The figure didn't wait for an answer. The beam of light went out. The footsteps turned into a sudden, swift sprint towards the secondary emergency exit. Tom, spurred by adrenaline and the terrifying realization of potential sabotage, bolted out from behind the plane. He reached the exit just as the figure shoved the bar and disappeared into the whipping wind and darkness outside. Tom stared into the stormy night, the rain beginning to fall in fat, cold drops. The figure was gone. He ran back to the maintenance bench, his hands shaking as he flicked on the single lamp. The toolbox was a mess. A quick check revealed the missing item. A rare, highly specialized micrometer, a device used for measuring the precise dimensions of bullet casings. Tom looked down the empty aisle where the 21st crate sat. He looked at the empty spot on the bench where the micrometer had been. A missing cursed machine gun, a specialized tool for ammunition, and a phantom figure with a massive homemade ammo belt. The pieces didn't fit a simple theft. They suggested a plan, a precise dark operation, and the missing 50 cal was the key. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that the 21st gun hadn't just been stolen, it had been acquired for a specific, sinister purpose. And the man who yelled, "Keep it loaded," wasn't some myth. He was a very real and very dangerous threat lurking in the wartime American shadows. Tom picked up the logistical report with the faded Oni stamp. This wasn't his job, but now it was his war. The real fight wasn't across the ocean. It was here, on the home front. A secret war fought in the shadows of the nation's arsenal. This is a story built on real history, real tension, and real human drama. If you're ready to see how Tom's investigation connects the missing 50 cal, the mysterious figure, and the secret war on the home front, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Tom Sterling felt a tremor of true fear, colder and sharper than the San Diego night air. He was no detective, merely an engineer trapped in the wartime chaos, but the evidence was screaming for attention: a high-caliber weapon gone, a professional thief, and a specialized tool for loading unique ammunition. This was espionage, perhaps sabotage, and the thought of reporting it through official channels, a labyrinth of bureaucracy and suspicion, filled him with dread. The faint Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI stamp on the inventory report, suggested a secrecy far beyond the base's internal affairs. Tom locked the hangar door and retreated to his small, unauthorized workshop, a cramped, secluded room behind the main maintenance office, where he pursued his real passion, experimental mechanics. This room, filled with blueprints and repurposed scrap metal, was his sanctuary, and now his clandestine operations center. He studied the salvaged logistical report, the official stamp mocking his isolation. 21 units, serial number B7734X missing. He focused on the only tangible clue he had, the homemade ammo belt he'd glimpsed. A standard 50 cal belt held 100 rounds. To fire for hours, as the legend suggested, required an industrial-scale modification, likely a continuous feed system far beyond standard military hardware. Why the micrometer, Tom thought. It's for extreme precision. Ammunition manufactured on a massive industrial scale like the military's has minor variations, but custom-made, homemade ammo, the kind that would be required for an improvised, continuous belt, demands meticulous sizing to prevent jamming. The thief wasn't stealing a gun to be used immediately. They were refining the method to keep it firing relentlessly. They were preparing a spectacle. He remembered a character in the ordnance log, a name that always stood out. Jerome Jerry Kincaid, a brilliant but volatile inventor who had briefly worked on a machine gun project at the base 6 months prior. Kincaid had been pushing a radical high-capacity belt design, claiming the Navy was blind to its potential. The Navy brass, prioritizing mass production, had dismissed him, calling his invention overly complex and unnecessary. Kincaid had left abruptly, disappearing into the civilian war industries, a ghost the base tried to forget. Tom used his privileged access to the internal base archives, bypassing the official digital logs, too traceable, and digging into the brittle, dusty paper records stored deep in the maintenance vault. He found Kincaid's personnel file surprisingly thin for a man of his talent. The final termination report was boilerplate, failure to comply with standardized procedures. But stapled to the back was a handwritten note, not part of the official record. Subject exhibited extreme paranoia regarding his designs being suppressed. Highly volatile. Flagged for surveillance if he attempts to reacquire specialized ordnance. The file contained Kincaid's last known address, a small, isolated boathouse down the coast in Coronado, far from the bustling military zones. The logical progression of the mystery demanded it. The genius, the rejected invention, the missing weapon, and the need for precision ammo. Kincaid was their ghost. But Kincaid alone didn't explain the foreign accent or the Oni stamp. Tom knew he couldn't go to the captain with a hunch based on old paperwork and a glimpse of a trench coat. He needed proof. He decided to pay Kincaid a visit. He clocked out just before midnight, throwing off suspicion by complaining loudly about the freezing wind. Outside, the rain had settled into a persistent, misty drizzle, shrouding the city in a curtain of cold ambiguity. The silence of the streets, usually a relief, now felt menacing. His battered 1937 Ford coupe chugged along the coast highway, the headlights barely piercing the gloom. As he drove over the Coronado Bridge, he saw the distant dark silhouette of the naval base, its searchlights slicing the sky, and felt a profound sense of having crossed a line from technician to target. The boathouse was a derelict structure, listing slightly against a small private dock. No lights, no sound. Tom killed his engine half a mile away and proceeded on foot, the cold spray of the bay mist biting at his face. The smell of salt, oil, and decay hung heavy in the air. He moved silently onto the creaking wooden pier. He was looking for evidence of the .50 cal. But what he found was something entirely different, something that confirmed his deepest fears about Kincaid's state of mind and the involvement of others. The boathouse door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. Tom eased it open. The interior was a chaos of engineering obsession, circuit boards, half-finished clockwork mechanisms, and piles of military scrap. In the center, dominating the space, was Kincaid's prototype, the continuous feed ammo belt. It was a staggering sight made of hundreds of brass links, connected by reinforced leather, capable of feeding thousands of rounds. It was magnificent, terrifying, and entirely illegal, but it was what was next to the belt that made Tom's blood run cold. On a workbench beneath the blueprints for the belt lay two things. First, a detailed hand-drawn map of the North Island base, meticulously marking the locations of the new experimental aircraft hangars, and, second, a small, worn leather wallet. Tom cautiously picked up the wallet. Inside, among a few worn dollar bills, was an ID card. It wasn't Kincaid's. It was a foreign passport ID showing the face of the man Tom had glimpsed in the hangar, the sharp eyes, the hard jaw. But the name wasn't German or American. It was Dragan Volkov, and the country of origin was the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, a country now violently occupied, torn between Axis and Allied factions. Dragan Volkov, the accent, the Oni surveillance flag. Kincaid wasn't working alone or for himself. He was involved in a complex, multi-layered operation, a collaboration between the disgruntled engineer and a desperate foreign agent. But was Volkov an Allied spy trying to acquire the tech, or a saboteur using Kincaid's madness for an enemy's gain? Tom turned the map over. Scrawled on the back, in Kincaid's frantic handwriting, were only 3 words, an impossible instruction, a chilling hint at the plot's climax. The gunner yelled, "Keep it loaded." And below that, launch day, noon, launch day, the delivery of the missing 50 cal, the firing demonstration, the catastrophic sabotage. The event was imminent, and Tom was the only person who knew. He had the who, the where, and the chilling final twist. But he still didn't have the B7734X itself. Tom pocketed the ID and the map. He had to assume Kincaid and Volkov were already gone, setting up the final stage. He was racing against a clock he couldn't see. Tom returned to the base before dawn, the air smelling of impending disaster. The urgency of launch day, noon. Its heat was a physical weight on his chest. He knew he couldn't act alone, but approaching his superiors with a foreign ID, a madman's drawing, and the tale of a ghost in the hangar would land him straight in the brig. He needed an ally who understood secrets. He thought of the only person on base who ever seemed to read the intelligence memos before they were filed, Eleanor Vance, a civilian clerk in the Communications and Code Department. Eleanor was brilliant, with an unnerving calm, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She was also fiercely loyal to the base's security, and she was already suspicious of Tom's late-night habits. He found her in the deserted comms office, a cup of lukewarm coffee resting beside a stack of encrypted messages. The single lamp on her desk cast a pool of light on her face, highlighting her weariness. "Eleanor," Tom said, his voice low and strained, "I need you to look at something." Unofficially. Eleanor didn't look up immediately. "Petty Officer Sterling, you reek of salt and fear, and you're carrying unauthorized documentation. Spit it out, Tom. Now." He laid the Kincaid map and Dragon Volkov's ID on her desk. He kept his explanation brief, focused on the facts. The missing 50 cal B7734X, the custom micrometer, the homemade ammo belt, and Kincaid's connection to the experimental aircraft hangars. Eleanor slowly picked up Volkov's ID, her composure fractured slightly. She exhaled a long, measured breath. "Dragan Volkov," she murmured, her eyes tracing the name. "Not a German spy, Tom. Worse, Volkov is a Royal Yugoslav Army in the Homeland agent. Specifically, he was associated with a faction that specialized in procuring military assets, any assets, from the Allies for use against the combined Axis and local communist forces back home. They're desperate. They don't care about protocols, only results." She turned to the map. "Kincaid's experimental belt, the one that fires for hours, is a strategic asset. If Volkov can get that to his faction, it's a game-changer for small resistance units. But Kincaid," she pointed to the markings on the map, "Kincaid doesn't care about Yugoslavia. He cares about proving the Navy wrong. He's planning to destroy what he can't control." The map showed 3 targets around the airfield, all critical infrastructure points, but one was circled heavily. Hangar 4, where the prototype Navy dive bomber, the SB-2C Helldiver, was undergoing its final structural tests before mass production. "They're not just stealing the gun, Tom," Eleanor whispered, her voice tight with tension. "They're staging a demonstration. Kincaid wants to show the Navy exactly what his unstoppable 50 cal can do by destroying the Helldiver. It's revenge, broadcast via chaos." "Launch day, noon," Tom stated, his gaze meeting hers. "Today, we have less than 12 hours. Eleanor quickly typed Volkov's name into a secured terminal, bypassing several layers of authentication. Her face paled as the file loaded. "The ONI stamp," she said. "It wasn't surveillance, Tom. It was a compromise. Volkov wasn't here to steal the gun. He was supposed to receive it. The Navy was involved in an off-the-books deal, trade the experimental. 50 cal tech for Yugoslavian intelligence on Axis movements. The deal went sour when Kincaid, the original engineer, learned about the trade and decided he'd rather see his invention used to burn the base down than fall into any government's hands. The situation was far worse than Tom had imagined. It wasn't an external attack. It was a conspiracy of incompetence and desperation that started inside the Navy itself. Reporting it meant exposing the Oni's unauthorized trade, which would bury the truth in an explosion of scandal and bureaucracy, likely delaying any action until afternoon. "We have to stop them ourselves," Tom decided, his voice gaining a sudden, fierce conviction. "If they start firing B-7734X on the Helldiver, it'll be impossible to stop without heavy casualties." Eleanor didn't hesitate. "The weapon isn't in Hangar 4 yet. Kincaid is a fanatic about precision. He needs to test the belt one last time before the show." She snatched a local base map. Where would a gunner need a clear line of fire, a sturdy mount, and a view of Hangar 4? Tom visualized the base layout, his engineering mind kicking into gear. The old refueling platform on the perimeter, it's decommissioned, elevated, and has perfect sight lines. Nobody checks it anymore. "I'll access the comm logs, try to pinpoint any unusual radio traffic from that sector in the last 24 hours, Eleanor said, already moving toward the terminal. "You need to get to the platform. Be careful, Tom. Volkov is a professional soldier. Kincaid is a lunatic with the most dangerous machine gun in the country." Tom nodded, his hand tightening around the heavy wrench he still carried. He finally understood the legendary title. The gunner yelled, "Keep it loaded." It was a command that signified the end of military protocol and the beginning of relentless, devastating, and entirely personal carnage. He glanced at the clock. 7 a.m. The fog of bureaucracy had lifted. The reality of the suspense was the race against time, and the weight of the growth was the burden of becoming the man who had to stop the fire. The refueling platform stood like a skeletal monument to outdated infrastructure, a massive, rusted steel tower on the periphery of the base, overlooking the testing tarmac. The morning had broken cold and gray, the sky a mirror of Tom Sterling's apprehension. He had borrowed a maintenance truck, claiming an urgent electrical fault near the perimeter to gain access to the restricted area. He parked hidden behind a stack of obsolete oil drums and began his ascent. The ladder was slick with cold dew and rust, and every creaking footstep resonated in the still air, a drumbeat of his own fear. Tom wore only his denim jacket, the cold bite of the wind, a constant reminder of the stakes. He was counting on stealth, not strength, against two dangerous men. As he reached the narrow, elevated platform, the first thing he saw was the legendary weapon. There she was, BFC-34X, the missing 50 caliber machine gun mounted on a heavy, custom tripod. It was an object of terrifying beauty, its massive barrel gleaming, its loading mechanism adapted for the homemade continuous feed brass belt. The belt itself, an industrial-grade miracle of engineering, snaked away from the gun toward a large insulated box, presumably containing thousands of rounds. Standing next to it, meticulously sighting the weapon towards the distant Hangar 4, was Jerome Kincaid. He looked hollow, gaunt, his eyes burning with an intense, manic focus that transcended sanity. He was adjusting the micrometer on a test round, ensuring the perfect feed. "It's going to work, Tom," Kincaid murmured, his voice startlingly calm, almost scholarly. He hadn't turned around. He simply knew Tom was there. "They said it was too complex. They said it was overkill. They said I was a dreamer. But once this Helldiver is gone, once they see the carnage, they will finally understand what true firepower looks like." "Kincaid," Tom said, trying to keep his voice level, "this isn't just about proving a point. You're working with a foreign agent. This is sabotage, treason." Kincaid finally turned, his face contorted in a sneer. "Volkov? He's a necessary tool. He knows how to get the resources, the custom casings, the secrecy. I get my demonstration. He gets the tech to play his petty little war games. The Navy loses its precious asset and learns a lesson about disrespect." Tom took a careful step forward, holding the wrench loosely at his side. Volkov's faction is desperate. They're not going to let you just destroy the gun after your show. They'll use it against Allied interests if you let them. You're giving them a weapon of mass destruction. I control the belt, Kincaid replied with chilling simplicity. No one else understands its tolerances. It's my invention, my key, my revenge. As Kincaid spoke, a rustle of movement drew Tom's eyes to the far end of the platform. Dragan Volkov emerged from the shadow of the water tank. Unlike Kincaid, Volkov was all coiled, professional intensity. He wore the same heavy, dark coat, but now his hand rested on a holstered sidearm, a pre-war Luger, unusual for the American theater. "You should not have come alone, petty officer," Volkov said, his Yugoslavian accent a hard, gravelly sound. "It changes the timeline, but not the result." Tom was trapped between the mad engineer and the hardened soldier. His only defense was the flimsy metal wrench and his knowledge of the weapon. Kincaid, eager to return to his centerpiece, gestured dismissively toward Volkov. "Get rid of him, Dragan. Noon is approaching. I need to make the final adjustments." Volkov drew the Luger, the sharp click of the safety echoing in the cold air. "The weapon stays operational, engineer. The demonstration is necessary to hide the theft, but the rifle belongs to my people." A sudden sharp tension flared between the two conspirators. Volkov's primary goal was the machine gun. Kincaid's was the spectacular act of destruction. Tom saw his opening. He needed to disarm the gun, not the men. "You need to check the feed pal, Kincaid," Tom bluffed, taking a desperate risk. "The humidity will throw off the tension on that brass feed. If it jams on the first burst, your legacy is just a failed prototype." Kincaid froze, his engineer's obsession momentarily overriding his paranoia. He quickly knelt beside the heavy mechanism of the Kampf 50 cal, his face inches from the bolt. That was all the distraction Tom needed. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he didn't run for the men. He ran for the continuous ammo belt spool. He swung the heavy wrench in a wide, desperate arc, not at the metal, but at the connecting point between the spool and the gun's feed block. Crack! The wrench smashed into the custom-machined brass feeder. The joint shattered, the brass links snapping and spraying across the platform. The continuous feed, the engine of Kincaid's revenge, was instantly severed. The gun was now loaded with only the few rounds already in the breech. "No!" Kincaid roared, spinning around, his face a mask of insane fury. He scrambled for a secondary tool, a heavy steel lever, ignoring Volkov entirely. Volkov, however, reacted with brutal efficiency. He didn't waste a shot on Tom. Instead, he leveled the Luger at Kincaid. "The gun is disabled, engineer, but the man who knows the schematics is still useful." But Kincaid was far past reason. He lunged at Volkov, the steel lever raised. "You won't take my design. You won't." The platform erupted with the deafening report of the Luger. The bullet struck Kincaid in the shoulder. He staggered back against the railing, clutching the wound, his eyes wide with betrayal. Volkov advanced, ready to deliver the final killing shot. Tom knew the gun only had the few rounds in the breech, and the legendary belt was destroyed. He had to finish this now, before Volkov turned the Luger on him. The ultimate confrontation, fueled by fear and necessity, had arrived. The echo of the gunshot died down, replaced by the wind whipping through the metal struts of the platform. Tom Sterling stood 10 feet from Volkov, who had Kincaid pinned against the rail. The Luger was steady, pointed at Kincaid's head. "The schematics, engineer," Volkov demanded in a cold fury. "Where are they? You can still be useful." Kincaid, bleeding profusely, let out a maniacal, strangled laugh. "They're in the belt." "In the brass, you fool! Only I knew the specific metallurgy. Now it's just scrap." Volkov cursed in his native tongue, his face contorting in frustration. The destruction of the belt was the true loss. The weapon was secondary. He turned the gun slowly toward Tom, the muzzle an absolute focal point of deadly danger. "You," Volkov stated, a chilling calm returning to his voice. "You knew about the deal. You are the only other variable." Tom lifted his hand slowly, but his eyes were on the B-7734X machine gun. It was useless for its intended goal, but its power was still absolute at close range. "Your sidearm," Tom said, his voice surprisingly steady. "It makes noise. A single burst from this." He gestured to the Pacom 50 cal. "And the entire base hears it, and they know where to look." He was bluffing. The belt was broken, but the few rounds in the breech were still live. Volkov, a man of extreme precision, would know that a single burst was an immediate alarm. Volkov lowered the Luger slightly, a flicker of professional doubt crossing his face. He glanced at the machine gun, then back at Tom, weighing the risk of detection against the final silent kill. This was the sliver of opportunity Tom needed. He knew that the legendary 50 cal B-7734X had one fatal authentic flaw that Kincaid's custom work had never fully solved: a sensitive, poorly calibrated recoil spring that had necessitated the specialized micrometer in the first place. Instead of fighting, Tom ran to the heavy machine gun, placing his hands on the cold metal. He didn't aim it. He didn't cock it. He simply used his strength to shove the massive weapon sideways on its mount. The impact of the heavy 50 cal against the steel railing created a shocking, deafening clang that reverberated across the empty airfield. The noise was accidental, but it was just as effective as a shot. Volkov reacted instantly, his training overriding caution. He squeezed the trigger of the Luger, but his aim was deflected by the noise. The bullet sparked harmlessly off the steel railing where Kincaid was moments before. Kincaid, seeing his chance and fueled by his own betrayal and madness, lunged at Volkov one last time, not with a weapon, but with sheer, desperate force, tackling the agent off the platform's edge. They fell together, a heavy, dark mass of struggling bodies, striking the dirt below with a sickening, final thud. Tom staggered to the railing, leaning over. Kincaid was motionless. Volkov, however, was trying to rise, his Luger arm bent awkwardly beneath him. He looked up at Tom, his eyes radiating pure, murderous hatred. But before Volkov could fully recover, a new sound split the morning air, the distant but unmistakable sound of approaching sirens. Eleanor had done her job. Volkov struggled to stand, his face contorted in a silent snarl of defeat and rage. He knew the end. He took one last desperate look at the disabled B-7734X, a silent promise of future revenge, and then, using the darkness of the industrial shadows, he began to limp away, melting into the perimeter fog. He was gone, but the ghost was identified. Tom stumbled back from the rail, collapsing onto the platform, the cold steel finally supporting his shaking frame. The wrench dropped from his hand with a soft, final thud. The silence returned, heavy and absolute, broken only by the distant, accelerating wail of the sirens. He had stopped the sabotage. He had prevented the destruction of the Helldiver and averted a national security scandal. He had also watched a man's life consumed by his own bitter genius and forced a highly trained agent into the shadows. As the first headlights of the military police vehicles appeared below, cutting through the morning mist, a pale wash of orange sunlight finally broke through the gray cloud cover. Tom looked at the magnificent, terrifying 50 cal, its continuous belt shattered. He realized his growth was complete. He had entered the night as an engineer obsessed with fixing things. He emerged into the sunrise as a man who understood the profound, sometimes necessary horror of breaking them. The legend of the gunner who yelled, "Keep it loaded," was not about unstoppable fire. It was about the price of engineering genius, twisted into revenge and the personal cost of stopping a ghost. Tom stood up and waited for the inevitable interrogation, the official cover-up, and the long, silent shadow that his secret war had cast over his life. If this deep dive into the real, tense drama of the World War II home front captivated you, and you want to discover more stories of courage, mystery, and personal growth during the war, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell.